The knock on my door wasn't just loud. It felt final, like the world had decided to test me one more time. I almost didn't answer, standing there with bills scattered across the table and grease still on my hands from the garage. But when I opened it, a college girl with a suitcase was standing in the rain, looking at me like she needed a place to stay. I had no idea letting her in would unravel everything I thought I knew about my life. The knock came sharp and quick, 3 taps that echoed through the narrow hallway and into Daniel's chest. For a breath, he considered pretending he wasn't home. It had been that kind of month. Letters with red print, calls he let ring out, promises he could no longer keep to himself. He stood with his hand on the doorknob, hearing the tick of the kitchen clock and the whisper of rain against the porch roof, and told himself to open. He did. A young woman stood on the step with a carry-on suitcase and a careful smile. Wind had teased loose strands from her ponytail, and she tucked them behind her ear as if rehearsed. "Hi," she said, voice steady but soft. "I'm Emily. I called about the room." Daniel cleared his throat. "Yeah, the spare room." He hated how defensive the word sounded. Spare meant empty. Empty meant the studio that hadn't been touched since his wife's canvases dried for the last time. Emily shifted her grip on the handle. "I'm starting classes in a week. I need something close enough to walk. I can pay the first month now." She lifted her chin a fraction, nervousness laced with a kind of quiet grit, the sort of resolve Daniel recognized from long winters and stubborn engines. He stepped back, coming out of the rain. They crossed the short hall to the kitchen. The house smelled faintly of motor oil no matter how often he mopped, a scent that made him feel both competent and ashamed. He wiped his palms on his jeans. "It was my wife's studio," he said, before the question came. I haven't used it in a while." "I'm sorry," Emily replied, not as a reflex, but in a circle of silence that let the words land. "If it's still okay, I'd love to see it." He led her down the hall. The door stuck, as always. He put his shoulder to it, and it eased open with a sigh. The room held dust-soft light from a high window. Drop cloths, a wooden easel, a tin of brushes gone stiff. Daniel thought of his son drawing crooked superheroes on the floor while his mother painted, and a pressure rose in his throat. "It's big," Emily said, stepping carefully as if the room could bruise. "And quiet. That's perfect for studying." He found himself exhaling. "I can clear the easel, box up the paints. I should have done it months ago." "You don't have to rush for me," she said. "I can work around what's here." He looked at her then, really looked. Worn backpack, scuffed suitcase, plain jacket zipped to the throat. No ring, no expensive perfume, no air of someone shopping for a story. Just a student who needed a door to open. "How much did we talk about on the phone?" he asked, returning to the only defense he trusted, terms and numbers. "Rent is due on the 1st. No parties. I'm up early. My son's 8, so just be mindful." Of course. She didn't flinch at "my son," didn't widen her eyes or tilt her head with the pity that made Daniel want to armor himself. "I can help with chores. I cook simple things. I'll keep to myself if that's easier." He heard himself say, "It's not about easier." The truth surprised him. He cleared his throat again. "There's a key on the hook by the door. If you're sure." Emily's smile softened from careful to real. "I'm sure." He hesitated, one last check against impulse. Rent money would help. A steady presence might help more. He thought of late-night lists and the sound of the house settling around the two of them. He thought of responsibility, of boundaries, of the studio that had become a shrine because he hadn't known how to let it be a room again. "All right," he said. "We'll try a month." "Thank you," Emily answered, and the relief in her voice was small and dignified, the kind that belonged to people who had learned not to expect kindness on the first ask. Back in the kitchen, rain softened to a hush. Daniel poured water into 2 glasses and pushed one across the table. "You'll have space for a desk. I can fix the window tomorrow. It sticks when the weather turns." Emily wrapped her hands around the glass like it was warm. "I'll get used to the house," she said. "I don't need much." He nodded, feeling the unfamiliar weight of possibility settle in the room. At the threshold, he paused and glanced toward the studio door, ajar like a held breath. "Welcome, then," he said, and surprised himself by meaning it. The clock ticked, the roof sighed, and in the smallness of those sounds he felt the first hinge of his life shift, not loudly, not dramatically, but decisively, as a door opening in from the rain. The first week was awkward in ways Daniel had expected. Emily unpacked into the studio slowly, almost reverently, folding clothes into the dresser drawers that had once held sketchbooks and paint rags. Daniel heard the scrape of her suitcase wheels across the floorboards, the click of her lamp switching off late at night, and the careful hush of someone determined not to intrude. He reminded himself that this was temporary, that she was a tenant, not family. But the house, for the first time in years, sounded less hollow. Mornings began earlier. Daniel would shuffle into the kitchen in work boots, hair damp from the quickest shower possible, only to find a pot of oatmeal steaming or toast already browned on a plate. "I didn't ask you to." He started one morning, tugging at his jacket zipper. "I know," Emily said, stirring the pot with a wooden spoon. "But Noah was hungry, and I like cooking." She glanced at him sideways. "Besides, it keeps me from stressing about exams." Daniel opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. He watched Noah chatter about dinosaurs between bites of oatmeal and felt his resistance slip another notch. "Fine," he muttered, though what he meant was thank you. Evenings drew them into rhythms Daniel hadn't realized he missed. Emily sat with Noah at the kitchen table, leaning over his math problems. "Show me how you got that answer," she encouraged, tapping the pencil against the page. Noah would frown, erase, and try again, her patience steady as water. Daniel often came home to find his son's laughter spilling through the door before he even turned the key. The sound startled him, like hearing music after forgetting what silence meant. One Tuesday, Emily tightened the loose hinge on the squeaky window Daniel had sworn for months he'd fix. He came into the living room to find her crouched on the floor with a screwdriver. "You didn't have to," he said, a little sharper than intended. She looked up, grease smudged on her wrist. "I didn't mind. It was an easy fix." Then she added gently, "You've got enough on your plate." Daniel felt a sting of both gratitude and defensiveness. "It's my house. My responsibility. I know." She wiped her hands on a rag and stood. "I'm just here. That's all." It wasn't grand gestures that softened him, but the quiet constancy. The way she folded dish towels without being asked, the way she laughed, not politely, but fully, at Noah's over-the-top superhero impressions at dinner. One evening, Noah stuck his arms out like wings and narrated in a booming voice. "I am Megadad, fixer of cars and crusher of villains." Emily nearly choked on her water from laughing so hard. Daniel found himself grinning, caught off guard by how natural it felt, how much lighter the table seemed with her at it. Still, he kept a wall up. Pride had grown around him like armor after loss. He told himself Emily was a renter. That kindness didn't mean permanence. Yet, some nights, when Noah had gone to bed and the house settled into quiet, Daniel caught himself listening for the scratch of Emily's pen as she studied behind her door, or the faint hum of music she played low, like a secret. The presence of another heartbeat in the house, steady, calm, and unassuming, was beginning to feel less like intrusion and more like something he hadn't dared to name. One evening, rain tapped against the windows while the three of them lingered after dinner. Noah reenacted a scene from his favorite cartoon, complete with exaggerated villain voices. Emily clapped and laughed until tears shone in her eyes. Daniel watched her, not Noah, and realized his own mouth was curved into a smile he hadn't worn in years. It startled him. For a moment, the heaviness in his chest eased, and the house didn't feel like a place of loss. It felt alive again. Daniel pushed back from the table, clearing plates to disguise the weight of that realization. He told himself it was nothing, just a tenant making herself useful, just his son enjoying attention. But as he rinsed dishes, he heard Emily and Noah laughing together in the other room, and he knew deep down that something inside the walls of his carefully guarded life was already shifting. Bills piled like bricks, each envelope a weight on Daniel's chest. He opened them at the kitchen table late at night, when Noah was asleep and Emily's door was closed, the thin paper edges cutting deeper than any blade. Rent had gone up again, another $100 he didn't have. At the garage, hours were thinning. The boss muttered about closing, about bigger chains swallowing small shops. Daniel worked double shifts, patched cars on the side, but the math refused to stretch. Numbers on paper were merciless. They didn't care how hard he worked or how much his son deserved stability. He tried to hide it. In the mornings, he cracked jokes with Noah over cereal, ruffled his hair, and hurried him out the door. At night, He forced smiles when Emily asked about his day. Busy, he'd say, or just cars. But Emily noticed. She noticed the way his hands trembled slightly when he slid another overdue notice into a drawer. She noticed the new crease in his brow, carved deep by worry. She noticed how often he skipped dinner, pretending he'd already eaten at the garage. Her silence wasn't ignorance. It was respect, waiting for him to admit what she could already see. One evening, Noah bounded into the living room with a drawing clutched in his hand, a stick figure family. In the middle, Daniel on one side, Emily on the other. "We're superheroes," he announced proudly. "You're strong, Dad. I'm Speed Kid, and Emily's super helper." Emily laughed, pulling him into a hug. Daniel forced a chuckle, but when his eyes fell on the drawing, something inside him cracked. Superheroes didn't lose garages, didn't face eviction, didn't sit awake at 3 in the morning calculating how to stretch $20 into gas, groceries, and lunch money. He excused himself to the kitchen, gripping the counter until his knuckles whitened. Emily followed after Noah had darted off to play. She leaned against the doorway, her voice careful. "Daniel, maybe I could help." Her tone carried no pity, just quiet sincerity, as though she was offering more than money. She was offering partnership. His head snapped up, pride flaring sharp. "No, absolutely not." The words landed harsher than he intended, but he didn't soften them. "You're a student. You've got your own life to worry about. I don't take handouts." Her expression didn't change, though something in her eyes flickered. Pain, maybe, or disappointment. "It's not charity," she said softly. "It's just help." Daniel shook his head, voice dropping to a growl. "Help turns into debt. Debt turns into favors. I've already lost enough depending on someone else." He didn't say my wife, didn't say the hospital bills that drained us dry, but the silence between them carried the words anyway. Emily nodded once, lips pressed tight. She didn't argue, didn't push. "I understand," she murmured and slipped back into the hall. But in her chest, her heart ached. She knew she could erase his problems in a heartbeat. A single phone call, a signature on a check, and Daniel would never worry about bills again. Yet that wasn't what she wanted. She didn't want to be seen as a lifeline bought with money. She wanted to be seen as herself. Emily, the tenant who cooked, who laughed at Noah's jokes, who cared. Not Emily Williams, daughter of a billionaire with a last name that bent doors open. That night, Daniel sat long after the house had gone quiet, the drawing of the stick figure superheroes resting on the table beside him. He traced the lines with his thumb, the crude smiles drawn in marker, and whispered to no one, "I can't fail him." Not him too. Upstairs, Emily lay awake, staring at the ceiling, silently promising herself she would find a way to help, without breaking the fragile trust that kept her part of this fragile, makeshift family. The rain that afternoon fell like a punishment, steady, cold, and unrelenting. Daniel's old truck coughed as he turned the key, the wipers smearing more than they cleared. He'd left the interview with his stomach in knots, the manager's polite refusal still ringing in his ears. "We're looking for someone with more stability." A kind way of saying we don't trust a man drowning in bills to keep afloat here. He drove harder than he should, knuckles pale against the wheel, praying he wasn't too late. When he pulled up to Noah's school, the courtyard was nearly empty. Only one figure sat on the steps. His son, knees pulled to his chest, backpack hugged tight, small shoulders hunched against the downpour. Beside him, a dark umbrella tilted at an angle, shielding him from the worst of it. Emily stood there, soaked from the waist down, hair plastered to her cheeks, her eyes scanning the parking lot with calm patience. Relief and shame crashed through Daniel at once. His boy hadn't been alone, but Daniel hadn't been the one there. He rushed forward, words tumbling. "Noah, I'm sorry, buddy, the interview, traffic." His voice broke under excuses. Noah looked up, lips trembling with a small smile. "It's okay, Dad. Emily stayed with me." The simplicity of his forgiveness made Daniel's chest ache worse than any accusation could have. Emily folded the umbrella, her hands red from the cold. "He wasn't out here long," she said gently, as if to soften the blow. But Daniel heard the truth underneath. "Long enough for you to be too late." He swallowed hard, nodding without meeting her eyes, and gathered Noah close. "Let's get you home." That night, the house was quiet except for the drip of rain sliding down the gutters. Noah had fallen asleep quickly, exhaustion pulling him under. Daniel sat at the kitchen table, head in his hands, the lamp above him casting a circle of light that only made the rest of the room feel darker. His chest rose and fell in shallow bursts, as if the weight pressing down refused to let him breathe. He didn't hear Emily enter until a mug of tea touched the table beside him. Steam curled upward, carrying the faint scent of chamomile. She didn't sit right away, just stood across from him, her presence steady. "You don't have to drink it," she said softly. "But it's warm." He lifted his eyes. For the first time since she'd moved in, he let the wall drop. "I can't keep up," he admitted, voice raw. "I can't even get to my son on time. What kind of father does that make me?" His throat closed, and he pressed his palm to his forehead. "I'm so damn tired of failing him." Emily's eyes shimmered, though her voice stayed even. "You're not failing him, Daniel. He's loved. He's safe. That's because of you." She drew out the chair and sat across from him, folding her hands. "But you don't have to carry all of this alone." He shook his head, clinging to pride like a shield. "It's my job. Mine. No one else's." Her gaze held his, unflinching. "Even heroes need someone to stand beside them." The words were simple, but they cut through his defenses like light through a crack. He wanted to argue, to push her away before she reached the places he kept buried. Instead, he looked at her face, rain-damp hair curling at the ends, tired eyes that held nothing but compassion, and something inside him gave way. He didn't speak, but for the first time in years, he let silence be enough and let someone else sit with the weight he carried. Outside, the storm eased to a drizzle, as though even the sky had tired of punishing him. Inside, Daniel sat with his head bowed, a cooling cup of tea between his hands, and realized he wasn't entirely alone. Not anymore. The following week, the air carried a heaviness Daniel couldn't name. The days blurred together, job searches that went nowhere, bills hidden in drawers, Noah's laughter trying to bridge the cracks in the silence. He noticed Emily watching him sometimes, her eyes measuring, as if she wanted to say more than she dared. He pushed it aside. He didn't have the space to unravel another mystery. Late one afternoon, the low growl of an engine cut across the quiet street. Daniel, rinsing dishes, froze at the sound, smooth, powerful, out of place in their modest neighborhood. He wiped his hands and stepped to the front window. A sleek black car had pulled to the curb, polished so sharply it mirrored the sagging houses around it. The door opened, and a man in an immaculate suit stepped out, posture straight as a blade. His shoes didn't splash in the puddles. They landed like they belonged nowhere near mud. Daniel's stomach dropped. "Landlord." The word slammed through him. "Eviction papers." Notices taped to the door. He braced himself for confrontation, fists tightening, chest hollowing. But before he could move, the front door opened from within. Emily stepped past him, her hand trembling only slightly on the knob. She walked onto the porch with a stillness that made Daniel's skin prickle. The man in the suit inclined his head, deference, not dismissal. His voice carried across the yard, crisp and formal. "Miss Williams. Your father has been worried." Daniel went cold. Miss Williams. The name hit him harder than any overdue bill. His gaze snapped to Emily. She stood frozen, color draining from her face, as if the mask she had worn so carefully was crumbling all at once. Williams. The billionaire who owned half the city, whose face stared from magazines, whose name loomed on skyscrapers and business headlines. And this girl, this tenant who cooked oatmeal and fixed windows, was his daughter. For a moment Daniel couldn't breathe. His chest heaved, anger and betrayal knotting in his gut. He shoved the door wider. "What the hell is this?" His voice shook, not from fear, but from the wild collision of pride and confusion. "You lied. All this time you lied." Emily turned toward him, lips parted, eyes wide with something that looked less like guilt and more like fear. "Daniel, please. Don't." He snapped, louder than he intended. His son was asleep in the next room, but the words tore out anyway. "You stood in my kitchen. You sat at my table. You let me believe." "What? That you were just some student looking for a room? You let me." He stopped, swallowing the surge of betrayal. "Why? Why would you do this?" The man in the suit shifted uneasily, as if unused to anyone raising their voice at her. Emily held up a hand to silence him, her eyes never leaving Daniel's. "I didn't want you to know," she whispered. "Not like this." Daniel's fists curled at his sides. All the moments of trust, the umbrella at the school, the drawings with Noah, the laughter at dinner, flashed in his mind, now threaded with doubt. Was it all staged? Was his son's happiness just another charity project? His pride reeled, wounded deeper than money ever could. "You should go," he muttered, though the words tasted like ash. "If this is who you are, you don't belong here. Not in my house." Emily flinched, the smallest break in her composure. For the first time since she'd arrived, she looked less like a tenant, less like a student, and more like a girl terrified of losing something that mattered more than money. But Daniel's anger burned too bright. He turned his face away, jaw locked, refusing to let her see the part of him that wasn't just furious, it was afraid. Afraid of what it meant to let her stay, and afraid of how much it already hurt to think of her leaving. The black car idled at the curb, engine purring like a reminder. She belonged to another world, a world he could never touch. The house felt smaller that night, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Daniel sat rigid at the kitchen table, jaw tight, staring at the cup of coffee he hadn't touched. Across from him, Emily sat with her hands clasped, knuckles pale, her suitcase still in the hall like an unspoken threat. Outside, the sleek car waited, headlights glowing faintly through the curtains, its presence a silent summons. "I should have told you sooner," Emily began, her voice low. "But I knew what would happen if I did. You'd look at me differently. You'd never believe anything was real after that." She swallowed hard, her gaze dropping to the table. "I didn't come here to trick you. I came here because I couldn't breathe anymore." Daniel let out a sharp laugh that wasn't laughter at all. "Couldn't breathe? You're a billionaire's daughter. You could live anywhere, have anything. And you ended up here? In my house. Do you have any idea what that looks like from where I'm standing?" His voice cracked under the weight of the truth he didn't want to face. That he had let her in, had trusted her, and now felt like a fool for it. Emily flinched but didn't back away. Her eyes shone as she lifted them to his. "Yes, I know exactly what it looks like. That's why I kept quiet. Because if I told you who I was, I'd never be Emily anymore. I'd just be Williams. A last name that decides everything before I open my mouth. Money changes the way people look at you. It changes every word, every smile, every kindness. I wanted, just once, I wanted someone to see me without all that." Her voice trembled, but her words carried weight, like stones dropped into water. Daniel's throat tightened, torn between anger and the recognition of something raw in her tone. Still, his pride roared louder. "So you thought you'd play poor? Hide in my house, cook my meals, laugh with my son. What was that to you? A game?" Her chair scraped as she leaned forward, urgency breaking through. "No, it wasn't a game. Not for me. Do you think I would have stood in the rain with Noah if this was just pretend? Do you think I would have spent nights studying at that little desk, or fixing a window, or—" Her voice cracked, and she pressed a hand to her chest. "Daniel, this is the first place that ever felt like home. Not because of the walls or the roof, but because of you and Noah. Because you didn't care who I was. You cared how I was. And I can't lose that." Silence followed, thick and heavy. Daniel's hands gripped the edge of the table, torn between the instinct to push her away and the ache of knowing his son adored her, that he himself had grown used to her voice in the kitchen, her laughter breaking through his walls. He wanted to shout, to demand why she hadn't trusted him. Instead, his voice dropped to a whisper. "You should have told me the truth." Emily's eyes brimmed with tears she refused to let fall. "I was afraid. Not of losing comfort, not of losing money. Afraid of losing this. Afraid of losing the only real family I've ever had." Daniel looked at her, really looked. He saw no arrogance in her face, no calculation, only fear and longing. And for the first time since the black car arrived, anger gave way to something heavier, the terrifying possibility that she wasn't lying, that she had chosen them, chosen him, not because of what he lacked or what he needed, but because of what he already was. Still, the father in him, the man who had been burned before, couldn't let go so easily. He leaned back, eyes shadowed. "I don't know if I can believe you," he admitted. "I don't know if I can let you stay." Emily lowered her head, her voice almost breaking. "Then at least know this, whether I stay or go, nothing about the way I feel is fake. Not for you. Not for Noah. That's the only truth I have to give." The words hung in the air, fragile but undeniable. Daniel pressed his palms together, torn open between distrust and the faint, dangerous hope that maybe, just maybe, she meant every word. The house was still the next morning, sunlight sliding through thin curtains and painting pale stripes across the worn kitchen table. Daniel sat there with a mug in his hands, long gone cold, staring at the surface as if the wood might hold an answer. His thoughts circled in silence. The black car idling at the curb, Emily's confession, the fear in her eyes. Pride told him to push her away, to guard himself from a world he could never belong to. But another voice, the quieter, more stubborn one, reminded him of Noah's laughter, of Emily's umbrella in the rain, of the way the house had begun to feel alive again. Noah shuffled into the room in his pajamas, rubbing sleep from his eyes. He climbed onto a chair and pushed a drawing across the table. 3 figures again. Him in the middle, Daniel on one side, Emily on the other. Above their heads, he had written in block letters, "My family." Daniel's throat tightened as he ran his hand over the paper. He hadn't asked for this bond to form, but it had, real and unshakable. Emily entered quietly, as if unsure she still belonged in the room. She looked at the drawing, then at Daniel, her voice soft. "If you want me to leave, I will. Just say the word." She tried to hold herself steady, but her hands twisted together, betraying the weight of her fear. Daniel studied her for a long moment. Then he exhaled, setting down his mug. "Leaving isn't what Noah needs. And maybe it's not what I need either." His voice was rough, but there was no anger left in it. Only weariness and the beginning of something like resolve. "You lied, yes. You hid who you are. But I can't ignore what you've done here. You've been family, whether you meant to or not." Emily's eyes shimmered, though she didn't let the tears fall. "I meant to," she whispered. "That's all I ever wanted." Later that week, Daniel was surprised when the suited man returned, not with threats, but with a quiet arrangement. No grand announcements, no strings. A discreet offer, backing for Daniel to reopen a small garage under his own name. Emily's father's influence hovered silently in the background, but Emily herself insisted on nothing more than what Daniel could accept without pride breaking. "It's your work, your hands," she told him firmly. "No one can take that from you." At first, Daniel resisted, but slowly he allowed the help, not as a handout, but as a foundation he could build on. Within months, he stood in a new shop, the sign above the door painted with his own name. Grease and grit returned to his hands, but now there was a steadiness beneath the strain. He came home tired, yes, but proud again. And through it all, Emily remained, not as a tenant, not as a guest, but as family. She walked Noah to school, studied at the kitchen table, filled the house with the kind of laughter it hadn't heard since before the loss. She didn't arrive as a savior or leave as a stranger. She stayed as Emily, the girl who had chosen them when she could have chosen anywhere else. One evening, Daniel found himself watching Noah and Emily argue playfully over a board game, their laughter spilling through the small house. The sight warmed something long dormant in him. He leaned back in his chair, the hum of comfort settling over him. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like a man waiting for life to collapse. He felt like a man with a home, messy, imperfect, but real. And in that moment, he knew his choice was made. Not wealth, not pride, not fear, family. Always family. Evenings settled into a rhythm that felt almost ordinary, though Daniel knew better than to take it for granted. The garage keys hung by the door, his name painted above the shop he now ran, and the weight of overdue notices no longer crushed him each night. But it wasn't the money, or even the security, that felt most different. It was the sound of the house, the kind of sound he hadn't realized he missed until it returned. The clatter of dishes, the shuffle of cards across the table, Noah's high-pitched laugh echoing from the living room, and Emily's softer laugh answering it. Dinner became their ritual, not takeout cartons or lonely plates eaten in silence, but real meals. Emily would stir a pot on the stove, Daniel would slice bread or pour drinks, and Noah would set the table with mismatched forks and crooked placemats. They sat together, 3 people bound by something no last name or bank account could measure. Conversation drifted from Noah's spelling tests to Emily's classes, from the stubborn old engine Daniel finally coaxed back to life to what movie they might watch afterward. One night, as the 3 of them lingered long after the plates were cleared, Noah leaned back in his chair and sighed contentedly. "This is my favorite," he declared. "When it's just us." His eyes flicked between Daniel and Emily, shining with a child's uncomplicated certainty. "We're the best team." Daniel's chest tightened at the words. He reached across the table, ruffling his son's hair, then let his hand rest briefly on Emily's. She looked up, startled, but didn't pull away. In her eyes, he saw the same thing he felt. Not grandeur, not wealth, but the simple grace of belonging. He thought of the black car, the suited man, the name that had once made him recoil. All of it felt far away now, irrelevant. What mattered was this moment. His son's smile, Emily's quiet strength, the warmth of a house that no longer echoed with absence. Later, as Noah dozed on the couch and Emily tucked a blanket over him, Daniel lingered in the doorway, watching. She glanced back, catching his gaze, and for a long breath neither spoke. They didn't need to. Everything worth saying was already there, written in the ease of their silence. The story hadn't ended with riches, or escape, or the weight of a famous last name. It ended here, in a small kitchen with peeling linoleum, in laughter shared over simple meals, in the steady trust that had taken root where grief once lived. Daniel finally understood what Emily had tried to tell him. The greatest wealth wasn't in money or power. It was in the hearts we opened our doors to, and the family we chose to keep. And as he turned out the light that night, Daniel felt something he hadn't in years. Peace. Real, quiet, enduring peace.